So odd, it's not so crazy. So, friends, welcome back to Scientists in Synagogue. What is a Human? Session 5. We've learned about biblical and rabbinic views of the human. We've learned about medieval philosophy and early modern philosophy, a transcendent God and an immanent God. We've learned about what does it mean to be a human in Jewish tradition. But tonight we are transitioning a bit. We should still ask those meaningful questions, kind of the spiritual questions, but we're transitioning to more material questions tonight and studying what is this thing, a human, but from a biological perspective and an evolutionary perspective. So it's my honor to introduce our esteemed congregant, Dr. Matthew Marin, who esteemed, infamous, I don't notorious. Yes. So Matt, am we ready to go? I'm ready to go. I'm going to be over here with at the control center.
So the rabbis already stole most of my initial session, but let me start anyway. This past May, as I think many of you know, TBO was awarded a grant in response to a request for proposals that was entitled Scientists in Synagogues. The purpose of the grant was to develop programs that offered Jews opportunities to explore the interrelationship between Judaism and science. We chose for our proposal to address the question, what is a human? Over the past summer, we planned a series of programs that would address the question, both from a Jewish perspective as well as from a scientific perspective. During our Rosh Hashanah service, Rabbi informed the congregation that we were lucky enough to have been awarded this grant, and that there would be a number of upcoming programs that would be funded, at least in part, by the grant. You may recall, I'm getting big bucks for this. You may recall that in the fall, we had several so-called prequel, actually it was a rabbi that called them that, prequel sessions. I'm not sure what it meant, but they were presented under the aegis of the grant. The first of those was an author-led discussion by one of our own congregants, Jane Loeb Rubin, who discussed her recent historical novel, In the Hands of Women. It was a fictional accounting of an obstetrician who worked to improve medical safety for women in the early 1900s. This was followed by 2 subsequent sessions in which Rabbi and our esteemed congregant, Dr. Leslie Phelps, presented sessions on the mind-body connection. And as Rabbi has just said, this is and what I would call the main series of the programs, which more directly address the question, what in from a variety of perspectives. Just to review briefly, in the first 2 sessions, Rabbi discussed the Bible and ancient Hebrew scholars had to say about this question, and then Dr. Eric of medieval and modern perspective. I plan and hope the scientific method differs from the faith-based approach to this question. As time permits, I'll spend some time on questions like the origin of the universe, a little time on the character. In 2 weeks' time, Dr. Susan Livingston is scheduled to continue talking about
They seem to be having
science,
some problems that,
but she will be a
yeah, they be having problems with the,
Okay. There we go. We back? You hear me at home? Yeah, okay.
Ready to go? So that from, as an academic physician, most of my career was, or most recently, I was at New Jersey Medical School, where I was director of pulmonary and critical care medicine. My responsibilities at the school included teaching of students on a variety of levels. So I talked to students who were medical students, as well as interns, residents, fellows in training, particularly in pulmonary diseases. I also was responsible for providing patient care and doing scientific research. My research has been in the area of understanding, for the most part, understanding the normal and pathophysiologic or pathology of airway secretion. This is of relevance to a disease, particularly cystic fibrosis, but also has relevance to areas like asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a whole spectrum of lung diseases. Now, even though I would like to consider myself, quote, a scientist, I think I clearly do not know all of science. And some of, or much of what we're going to be talking about tonight will be a challenge to the limits of my knowledge. I trust that we're going to have an interactive session, and that together somehow we can figure out and begin to explore what it is to be a human from a scientific perspective. Let's let's begin, or try to get things from a hopefully we're all muted at
Yes,
home.
now there.
Yeah, from a scientific perspective, or now I'm thrown off, but I'll come back to focus. I want to start by talking about what is the scientific method versus a faith-based approach to understanding the world among or around us. The scientific method is an approach, looking on the internet, I understand has been ongoing probably for about 1,000 years. The internet tells me that there was somebody named Ibn al-Haytham. Never heard of the person, but sounds like Eric may have heard of him. He's an Iraqi who lived from 965 to 1040. Over the ensuing years, there have been a whole bunch of scientists who've contributed to the concept of the scientific method. And here are some of the names that I recognize, like Galileo and Francis Bacon. If you look at your handouts, which it looks like everyone has, I have a link to a YouTube video that talks about the scientific method. And I have, just to start going through this, wonderful illustration on the board. I learned how to do that from Dr. Draft, who was instrumental in teaching this approach. But if you talk about the scientific method, the method begins with making an observation. The kind of observation might be something like, I have a toaster. The toaster fails to toast my toast, to toast my bread. And then from there, you go down, you see the question mark, you ask a question. Why won't the toaster toast my bread? And from then you go forward and you form a hypothesis. The hypothesis is really a testable explanation of why the toaster is failing. So for instance, you might think the toaster fails because the electrical outlet is broken. Okay, now that's a testable thing, and you make a prediction based on the hypothesis. So you go up there and you basically say, if I plug the toaster into a different outlet, it should toast. If the problem is the electricity and not the toaster itself. And so then you test the prediction, and you take your toaster, you plug it in, and it does one of two things. Either it toasts or it doesn't toast. And then let's say it doesn't toast. And then you could you come back and let's come up with another hypothesis or prediction. So you should reiterate. You have an observation now that 2 plugs didn't toast. And you could say, well, both plugs are broken and they're not getting electricity. Or indeed, both the toaster and the light are broken, but you took, I'm sorry, in order to make a new hypothesis, you might say something like, if I get a lamp over there that's lit and working, and I take that lamp and I plug it in to the second electrical outlet that say failed to toast. If the outlets are both broken, the lamp should not light in that second outlet. So by going around and around in a circle, making observations, questions, hypotheses, tests, and then reiterating the process, you can eventually get closer and closer to an explanation of understanding why something is the way that it is. So this is in the essence of it is the scientific method. Now the faith-based method is and here I'm on thin ground, and hopefully the rabbi will correct me if I'm wrong. But the faith-based method starts similarly in that you make an observation. The toaster fails to toast my bread. But then instead of formulating a testable explanation, you come up with an explanation like something that depends on a higher authority, such as a God, which is non-amenable to testing like it is in the scientific method. So you might say something like, the toaster fails to toast because I have sinned.
Yeah.
And God is punishing me. And therefore, that's why it's not toasting. And you can even make a prediction based on that approach, saying something like, if I live a good life, and God will reward me. And not only will he toast the bread, but he'll give me other rewards as well. So the key difference, as I see it, between the scientific method and a faith-based method is that in one, you have something in the real world that you can test. And in the faith-based approach, you have something that is not really testable, but depends on a higher authority. So the first question I'd like to open for the group as a whole is, do these approaches complement each other? Does the scientific method complement the faith-based approach in terms of dealing with questions that we face in life? Any thoughts on that?
It's, as you were explaining all of this, it reminded me of a conversation I had with my cousin who's a cardiologist. And I asked him, why does a human heart start beating at all? Not why does it continue to beat, but why does it start to beat? And that seems to me to be I would think it's a faith-based answer. That's what he said. But why does it continue to beat, and what keeps it beating? I would think would be a scientific answer. What do you think of my thought on that?
Anybody else? Eric?
I just want to follow up what I want to say exactly on keywords she used, why
Right,
versus how,
Mm-hmm.
right? Science conflates why with how. Why does the toaster not work? Well, how does it work? And now you know why it's not working.
Right.
So religion gives us an entirely different format for answering the why question. And then what it says on the how is an entirely different story.
I mean, I think at least in 2023, and I'm not sure if this is the case in medieval times,
Yes,
but
okay.
in 2023, the questions that are asked are different questions. Often. So, which gets back to the why and how, but, to me, you might not today not have a religious question about why the toaster didn't work. You might have it 300 years ago, why the fire didn't start, I don't know,
Right.
but, why 300 years ago, but, today you wouldn't ask it that way. To me, the questions are a little different.
so the why and the how complement each other, is that what I'm hearing?
I think that in particular with your cardiologist question, that I think the question about, he said the heart keeps beating, that there's a scientific reason for that, but why it started beating, he's thinking is, more of a spiritual, religious, or, reason. But in my mind, it is testable why it started beating. It's just that no one's tested it yet.
Yeah.
So it's also to your point that, at one point in time, we didn't know why it was beating. Now today, we know why it's beating, and tomorrow we may understand what made the initial heartbeat start.
To me, there's a qualitative difference for me, at least, because you talk about, to me, that's like the God of the gaps, like there's a God where the gap in our scientific knowledge is not there.
Mhm.
But I don't think that's good use of God, because I think it's not the gap, they're somewhat different questions. Because I agree with you, eventually, I
Yeah.
have faith that the
And
gaps get
that's the
smaller and smaller,
principle
and
of
then,
being,
right,
having
and then
science
there's
is that
nothing
you're
left,
always
so it's not a
learning.
God, I think it's kind of like a qualitatively different.
Right, so many things that today we know like this, not just the toaster, but a lot of science, a lot of biology.
Right.
100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, people would have said, well,
Less
why is
science.
this happening?
Yeah,
God
less
made
science.
And Jordan Wilder's bridge is staying Ealer Lake. When the bridge, there are a number of people on this bridge when it collapses. So our first how question or why question is why did the bridge collapse? And it's because it was poorly secured or something like that. But then you go into the next question. Why those people at that time on the bridge? Since people are crossing across this bridge all the time. I'm not sure that you can answer that one
Oh,
scientifically.
Oh,
I think
an
you,
engineer could.
I think you can.
No, I question about why those people at that.
You- I think you,
Just a story gave at that point, it was strange, and then.
So,
Even the story about,
10 minutes earlier.
No.
You know?
even the story about
Okay, so
people
why did it
marching
wasn't
across the
particularly
bridge.
equal?
Isn't there a story about marching across the bridge where a particular cadence on the bridge? That people were walking in a certain way, and that, made the bridge
But I
fall
think-
apart.
I think Joe is maybe
Yeah.
addressing the question of
Who was there?
what made them be there.
What made them be there?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
That may be more of a faith kind of
Yeah.
issue. So I think what I'm hearing is indeed we have two different methods
Mhm.
approaching different qualitative problems, but which potentially, when you look at issues around us, can complement each other. So the bridge broke because it wasn't scientifically properly secured, et cetera, et cetera. But what made the bridge break when people were on it? Well, the weight of the people, we understand that. But why were the people, or I get confused with Eric as whether I should be saying how or why. But,
Yeah.
but what is it that drove the people to be on the bridge at that particular time when they went down? So I,
I mean, if everything's mechanistic, though,
That's right. It's an
you could
yes,
eventually
absolutely.
figure it out, but we don't have the tools big enough
This is
to
the
go
gaps.
back in time
These are the
to
gaps. These are the
to
gaps.
get all the steps, right? So it could be a scientific question, but not one that we could answer.
Not one,
So-
yeah.
Are the spiritual questions the ones that we're willing to surrender to have our answers? Have answered for us?
Well-
And then when we,
I mean, what I would ask, what kind of questions do contemporary people have that science can't answer,
Right, it's just a qualitative.
right?
It's a qualitative.
Can a scientist answer an ethical question? You know, can a scientist answer a
Why people do what they
value
do.
question? What can it,
People's values, yeah.
right? I mean, psychologists try to answer the kinds of questions in a scientific way, but you know, some scientists would say that's not so scientific. I don't know. So, it's we can answer why the sun, you know, quote, comes up in the east, right? We don't need God for that anymore, right? If you will. But, you know, Matt's gonna talk about the Big Bang in a second, I'm sorry, but like.
don't steal it again, Rabbi.
No, sorry, but like, you know, what happened before and what happens after are religious questions too, which I don't know, Judaism always has all the answers for it, right? But
Look,
So-
science is never precise and
Yeah.
absolute.
Good.
So, you know, I think these are complementary because it fills gaps. Because no matter what science we know,
Mhm.
there's always some deeper issue around that science in the weeds, as we would say, that probably hasn't been figured out yet. You know, we know what DNA and RNA is, but we keep learning more about other components related to DNA and RNA and what they do.
We don't always appreciate the consequences when we do think
Right.
we learned something.
There's always more.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we've mapped the entire genome, but we have no idea what most of the genes do.
Well, very good. This is
Okay.
what I had hoped we would sort of engender with
Yeah.
that question, at least starting to think about that. What I'd like to now do is begin to move on in a sequential way to actually try to get to the question, what is a human? And to start, I think, looking around the room, I'm quite sure around the room, everyone lives in northern New Jersey. But in a broader sense, we all live in something called the universe, which can be defined as the totality of everything that exists. It's not only our home, and our city, and our state, and our country, and our planet, and our solar system, and our galaxy, and other galaxies, and indeed all of space. So the universe is this expansive entity. And I think the first question to begin to answer or to ask is, how does scientists think that the universe began? And indeed, Rabbi gave it away a little bit, but I would say that this is well beyond the kind of question that I asked during my research days. My kind of questions were like, why is mucus sticky? Why is it when you pull it apart, it makes this long?
thanks for that visual.
Right. My wife, I have jokes about this, but I'm not allowed to. do it. So let's move right along and see if we can muddle through the question of how the universe began. In 1929, Edwin Hubble, using the largest telescope of his time, discovered that distant galaxies were rapidly moving away from us. The scientific evidence is that the universe is expanding well beyond my expertise. But I do have a video that I hope we can all see
Yeah.
that will begin to answer some of that question.
First, I gotta mute this.
The Space Telescope was named for Edwin Hubble, the great astronomer who did much of his pioneering work in the 1920s at Mount Wilson Observatory in California. In those days, our own galaxy, the Milky Way, was considered the entirety of the universe. Nearly everyone, even Einstein, believed the universe had existed forever in its present state, that it was eternal and unchanging. But Hubble would prove them all wrong. He began by figuring out how far away the stars he was seeing actually were.
At the time of Edwin Hubble, it was hard to measure distances. It still is, even today.
It's difficult to know if a star appears bright because it is actually bright, or simply because it is close to us. So Hubble searched for a rare type of star, called a Cepheid variable. Cepheids pulse at a known brightness, so by measuring the amount of light he could see, he could calculate how far away the star actually was. In October 1923, Hubble found a Cepheid in a gaseous cluster of stars then called the Andromeda Nebula. It yielded a shocking discovery.
When he actually did the calculations, he discovered Andromeda was roughly 1 million light years away from us, which was outside our galaxy.
Andromeda was its own galaxy.
Oh, there are other galaxies out there, and we're just one of them.
For the first time in history, there was evidence that our universe stretched far beyond the Milky Way.
But then what he did was, we measured the speed of a whole bunch of these galaxies.
Edwin Hubble measured speed by looking at the light the galaxies emitted. He knew if the galaxy was moving toward him, the waves would shorten and shift to the blue part of the spectrum. If it was moving away, the waves would lengthen and shift to the red.
Every distant galaxy Hubble looked at, he saw the light from it being redshifted, which meant everything is moving away from everything else.
And he found the further away they were, the faster they were going.
In fact, the universe itself was expanding, stretching the light from the galaxies. Edwin Hubble had changed our understanding of the cosmos forever.
The whole universe was clearly expanding. And so this was the discovery of the expansion of the universe, which Einstein said, well, that's crazy, right?
The discovery of the expansion of the universe, of course, was a very strong piece of evidence for a beginning. If everything is now expanding, you can run this backwards and see that everything should have started from a certain point or singularity, what we today call a Big Bang.
Okay. Good. Okay. So based on the manner that the universe.
Turn your other.
Recording you.
Ready to go? Well, this is exciting. Based on the manner that the universe was expanding, Hubble suggested, as the video has said, that there was a time when the Big Bang occurred. And at that time, the universe would have been infinitesimally small and infinitely dense. And it's my understanding that the conditions, the laws of science that we understand now really break down at this kind of circumstance. And so that if there were earlier events than this time, than the Big Bang, they really don't account for anything that we're observing now. They have no influence. So from a scientific point of view, this is, quote, the beginning of time. I still have difficulty with the concept, but according to Stephen Hawking's book, I don't know if any of you have looked at A Brief History of Time, difficult book, which I did plow through at one point. When St. Augustine was asked what did God do before he created the universe? Apparently, Saint Augustine replied, time was a property of the universe that God created, and that time did not exist before the beginning of the universe. And in other words, this takes God outside of the universe, and space and time, in essence, really don't exist for God, and are not ruled by the scientific method. So I was hoping Dave Analik would be with me, but.
Well, I'll say a rabbinic, the ancient rabbis commenting on why was the world created with a bet. So if you look in the Torah, the first letter of the Torah is a bet, right? So like that. So you don't ask, is a bet, like this. You don't ask what's above, you're blocked from above and below and before, right? There you go. And
So
only-
that's-
only going forward is what you could ask about, right?
Why isn't there this,
Yeah.
isn't this idea that the God hollowed out the creation and created it
That's
like,
missed
for
us.
the void?
Yeah, so that's
Living
like,
a good 1,000 years later.
yeah.
So,
If anyone wants more background on Augustine's answer, I've got a whole class just waiting for you. Because that is a
Chew it up.
master stroke of synthesizing Aristotelian philosophical demands with Christian biblical demands.
well beyond me.
One
Sounds good,
day,
though.
one day.
So the question for the group is, how long ago was the Big Bang? And I know that
A long time ago.
15 billion.
that's, anyone else?
15 billion?
13.8, 14.3.
13.8 billion years is what is now. And as Leslie said, that's a long, long time ago. And I have actually read about this, trying to get your arms or head around that concept of 13.8. Let's try to break it down just for a few minutes, how long ago that actually is. Instead of talking about 13.8 billion years, let's think about 13.8 billion seconds. Now, do any of you have trouble sleeping at night? Okay, we've got an older group here. So that sometimes people will count sheep, I think. One sheep, two sheep, three sheep. Each time you do that, it's about a second's time. So think about, has anyone ever made it up to 1,000 sheep?
No.
How long would it take to get to 1,000?
A really long time, because I keep forgetting and I have to start over.
Yeah. There are some, structural problems.
1,000
But-
seconds. Well.
It would take,
Math, and it's like.
Under 20 minutes.
no, actually, for a 1 second interval to count to 1,000 sheep would take 16 2/3 minutes.
Is that right?
That's correct, because I read it in a book. Now to count 1 million sheep, now we're getting up there,
10 days.
11 and a half days.
Billion is like 18 years.
To count 1 billion sheep,
It's like it's years, isn't it?
It's 98.
31.5 years. Now, remember, we're still on seconds.
On second.
If you multiply that by 13.8 billion, we're now at 435 years. So you'd have to be awake for a long time. You'd have to, and not only that, but you'd have to be counting consistently at second.
It's an old joke. They don't give you $1 billion.
And then-
To take it.
And then if you multiply, there are 31,536,000 seconds in a year. So now we multiply that 435 years by 31.5 million. That's how long 13.8 billion years, and it comes back to what Leslie said, a long, long time. So I think you can begin to question what happened. What's the timeline after the Big Bang? What do scientists think happened after that? And now for the women in the class, I'm getting a bad look from that way.
This must
What's-
get
Watch it,
too
though.
hard for the men to answer.
The question is, what type of scientist studies the early times after the Big Bang? What's the, well, some of
Cosmologists.
cosmologists and Nancy, what is the type of scientist that does hair and puts on makeup? So the people can confuse that, and I just wanted to be sure that I didn't get into that.
Oh, my God.
It's a long way around, but there are theories relating to
right?
to how molecules form, how galaxies and stars. It's been going a long.
How many seconds?
How many seconds, right?
It would be a lot. But so the theories relating to how molecules, how galaxies formed, how stars and sun and solar system all formed, beyond my expertise, obviously. I'm a mucus man. So that I have put a link to a video that addresses this question. There also is a little book about the Big Bang by Tony Rothman that will give some insights into the question. But just a few points. 4.5 to 5 billion years ago, it's theorized that our solar system formed. 4.3 billion years ago, scientists think that the Earth may have developed the conditions necessary to support life. The oldest fossils are about 3.7 billion years. So moving along, the question, what is a human? I think we all know that a human is a living thing. And the next question that I'd like to address,
I wonder, before we go ahead.
Yeah.
Go back to a why question.
right,
So why does God set this up so that it takes so long to do all this stuff? Since, you know, it could have been done like that.
Very good.
In order to establish the laws of science, because then
Yeah.
we'd have nothing in order to regulate our own lives.
Right.
If God literally said, here's literally everything, nothing's.
Years to establish the.
Well,
laws.
I mean,
But if God
but
literally
even-
goes like this, then we wouldn't be able to study the speed of light. We wouldn't be able to study what gravity is. We wouldn't be able to study how water flows. We wouldn't be
Right.
able to develop technology. Because everything how it started is God going. There's no law, there's no repetition, there's no causal mechanism. So anything that we would develop would be impossible.
Well, it would be from the moment that everything has been created.
If we were gods, but we're not.
No, look, I mean.
We needed to evolve. You said we needed to evolve.
Yeah.
We needed to be evolved to be able to
And
understand.
how do we evolve using our rational capacities? By studying the world in front of us. And if the world in front of us just, if God really was fooling us and put fossils in the ground, like the creationists like to believe, right? The world really is 6,000 years ago and the fossils are there just to fool us. Then it becomes a providential, theoretical, why am I evil? Why am I being fooled? It's not I can learn something about the world. We've only been here. for
What was the
a short time.
medieval conception?
Well,
It seems to me that that was a very static view of what existed. You know, the earth is surrounded by spheres, et cetera, and
right.
move, and it's eternal.
Right, species are eternal,
well,
according to the medieval view. I don't see how that was
I mean,
a stump.
they worked at establishing time, et cetera, yet they were faced with a universe that is totally static.
You're right, there's a difference between static and God-given through miraculous means. There's a fundamental difference.
well, but also like, even, like, I'm not saying this is a scientific notion, but are people believe that God was 1,000 years is like one day to you?
That's what I was gonna
Yes,
Right.
I just interpret the 14.3 as, you know.
Right, right.
By.
Right, so like,
And you get
so even 780 since the beginning of the world, right? I don't think our people ever really believe that literally. Even the various controversy when a yogurt company in Israel put dinosaurs on the packages, and ultra-Orthodox Jews got mad at that, not because they didn't believe that there weren't dinosaurs, but because they didn't want their kids asking too many questions, right? And so you don't have to believe, of course, you don't have to believe that the world was created in 6 days, 6 days, 57, 84 years ago, right? So, but the notion of a billion, I think, might have blown people's minds even more than it does to us.
The number still makes no sense.
It makes no sense, right?
It's insanely huge.
And so,
There are billions of galaxies.
Right.
It makes.
but
no
e-
sense.
but even our ancestors, the rabbis and medieval people too, like they believed like God could have created other worlds before or created other universes before they created ours.
Maybe he
Like
did.
they're talking about that in ancient times too.
But I think it's interesting about the time. It's interesting, you said it's a real long time.
Hmm.
It's a really long time from our perspective.
I mean,
Well, no, it's from it's hard to get out of your subjective understanding.
Right.
What is long? Long,
right. So like, well, we say humans don't live a long time, but my dog might think that,
Exactly.
we live a very long time. But
so.
those huge tortoises that
Yeah.
in the Galapagos don't think we live.
A fruit
or,
fly
you know,
lives,
yeah.
a day and a half, so
Yeah,
I mean.
right.
So from our perspective, it's long, but so you can my point is you can understand from a Deity's perspective. If you did have a conception of God, that this might not be very long.
So Rabbi has really segued into the next segment.
That's
And
what I'm
that
here
is, thank you very much. So that we want to keep going on what is a human? And we all know that a human is a living thing. And so I think a basic question is, how do living things differ from inanimate or dead things? In other words, how does a turtle, like the one in the Galapagos, differ from a stone? And on your handout, actually, the way I approached this question was to go to ChatGPT, which is an AI, whatever, and ask the question, what is the difference between a living and a dead or inanimate thing? And what you see on your handout is what ChatGPT told me the difference was. And I think if you go down that list, it's probably pretty reasonable. Some of the key characteristics of living versus dead. A living being has metabolism. Living things exhibit metabolism, which involve chemical processes that occur within cells that maintain their lives. I'll come back to cells in just a second. This includes activities like energy production, growth, and removal of waste. Inanimate objects, to my knowledge, don't poop. They don't go through these various kinds of activities. You never
They're
know.
missing out.
Cellular structure, living things are pretty much all composed of one or more cells. Cells are the basic units of life. They are responsible for carrying out functions necessary for the organism to survive. Inanimate things are not composed of cells in the same sense. Living things undergo growth and development. A living organism typically grow and develop over a period of time. They start as a single cell. They may go through a series of changes, eventually reach quote maturity, and then die. Inanimate objects don't progress in this way. Reproduction, wow. Living organisms can reproduce, creating offspring that are similar to themselves, either asexual or sexual reproduction. They differ from inanimate objects, and that inanimate objects don't reproduce in that sense. Living things can respond to stimuli. If a living thing is in an external environment, it can exhibit behaviors or reactions in response to changes in the surrounding to better their survival within that situation. Inanimate objects don't respond in that way. Homeostasis, my dear wife Carol told me that no one would know what homeostasis was, but I'm sure many do. It's that living organisms can regulate their internal environment to maintain a stable condition. This is what homeostasis is about. They can change terms of conditions and try to achieve stability. Inanimate things don't do that. Adaptation and elevation and evolution. Living organisms can evolve over generations through the process of natural selection. So these are characteristics that are different from inanimate objects. Energy consumption. Living things require a constant source of energy to carry out their metabolic processes. Inanimate objects don't have that kind of requirement. So although this is not absolute and there are gray or areas or borderline cases, like, what is a virus? A virus isn't a cellular organism, yet it can occupy the insides of cells and carry out many of these processes, so that in some ways they sort of are crossovers. So moving along, how have living things changed over time? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. Suffice it to say that Charles Darwin was the one that was most influential in this area. He's a 19th century British naturalist, biologist, and geologist, best known for his groundbreaking contributions to our understanding of evolution. Let me just suffice it to say that Darwin's contributions really underline our understanding of evolution. It's laid the foundations for modern biology, and it helps us understand the diversity and complexity of life on Earth. Evolution is a process by which species change over time. And there are a number of ways that evolution occurs. One is by mutation. Mutation is random changes that can occur in DNA of an organism. This change not only influences how the organism functions, but how future organisms that are reproduced from the organism might function. I think everybody pretty much knows that DNA is, quote, the blueprint within the cells or the instruction manual within the cells that gives direction as to how the cell functions. Natural selection is something where certain traits are advantageous, they improve survival, and in reproducing, those that are more fit are more likely to survive. There's the concept of genetic drift and also genetic flow, where changes can occur either by inbreeding of populations or interbreeding of populations, or random changes that might just occur within the genes themselves. Is that someone giving me a message?
No, I
Go
wasn't,
away.
I wasn't beeping, I heard what that was. I'm just intrigued, what is the voyage of the Beagle? And we got the dog.
That's the show where he first got his idea.
Yeah, Voyage
from
of the
Turtle
Beagle
Bunny for
in 1831, at the age of 22, Darwin embarked on a 5-year scientific expedition. He was on something called the HMS Beagle. During this voyage, he collected the wealth of materials from places like Galapagos Island and other places around the world. And Origin of the Species was the book that he wrote based on this
Thank you.
voyage.
Just the cutest name.
That's where he first noticed that turtles evolve.
Beagle? If you like dogs, I guess it would be good.
It's actually an interesting read, because he actually drew in pictures of the beaks of different birds on different islands and how they changed according to, what their eating habits
The
were.
most important thing, I don't know what you think, but to me, his biggest contribution, because there was this idea of evolution. Remark, all these other people had this idea of evolution. And to me, his big contribution was what you said about natural selection, like the mechanism, and how it happened, and how it happens. To me, that was his biggest contribution, because I think evolution was in the ether by other
It should
people.
also be noted that he was racked with doubt and wrote many religious things towards the end of his life. And the National Library in Israel actually has a lot of,
Oh, really?
Really?
yeah. He was a good Christian boy who followed the science and saw what the science was saying, and then it led to a lot of doubts. And he has a few more religious themed writings that the rest of the world doesn't. really get.
I mean, how did they end up in Israel, yes?
Some rich dude bought it and his family died in the war, so Israel got it. That's my guess.
I mean, it's really hard to imagine how some of these early scientists, because they were so steeped in religion.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a big difference, I mean,
They
between,
did this as a religious cause, it was part of their understanding God's creation, and then it leads to an understanding of the world that's directly opposite what the church is telling them. So it's tough.
right, and like some people didn't publish their findings,
Right,
right?
yeah.
Because they were concerned about, but to me, just think about something we really take to our heart, and could we, if we found some evidence, could we give it up?
Yeah.
Hard to think that. Could, maybe not.
The Catholic Church didn't post Darwin. When he published his book. in
They had
1859,
already lost enough power. I'll say, they'd already lost enough power to the Protestant Reformation and everything, I'll say that.
Well, true, but they could have opposed it, but they accepted it.
Yeah,
So there's a.
they had their trial with Galileo, they're like, we're not doing this again.
I'll say one
I
funny
think
thing.
Galileo and Copernicus kind of exhausted.
And there were Jews at Darwin's time too, who were writing about it and saying, does this fit in rabbinic thought? For the most part, it did. And, but in the Scopes monkey trial, there was a reformed rabbi who was a witness
Right.
called to interpret the Bible for, during the trial and stuff, so.
Which side was he on? Was he?
He was on the evolution side.
He was.
Yeah.
So, moving right along, continuing to address the question, what is a human? I want to spend a little time on talking about how do humans uniquely differ from other living things. Again, I went to my friend ChatGPT and asked the question, and the list that I have on the handout really comes from ChatGPT. And I think that the important thing here is that each of these issues are ways that humans are unique, but often I think it's in terms of extent rather than these are unique characteristics. So the first one is complex cognitive abilities. Would we all agree that humans possess highly developed cognitive abilities that moves us beyond other animals?
Depends how old they are.
Even the most advanced of any animal would be on them. I'd say
No,
we're
I mean,
beyond
I-
any crow, any dolphin.
No, I'm kind of getting.
Yeah, but a baby human.
Compared to.
So is a baby human a human? Is a fetus a
I'm
human?
sure there's somebody. For it,
You know, no, I'm just saying. So, no, a baby does not have advanced cognitive abilities.
I'm sorry. Does any one person want to? Okay, moving to the second one, language and communication. Now, not many people have listened to this, but on Netflix, there's I think it's Netflix, it's called The Chimp Empire, maybe. That talks about how chimpanzees communicate with each other. And indeed, I think dolphins and whales apparently communicate. But I think we would all agree that humans really have taken this a step above what the animals can do. Culture and technology. Humans create and transmit culture in a whole variety of ways, through symbols, beliefs, values, and traditions. Maybe animals do this, but my sense is we're ahead.
I'm thinking of an animal.
Right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I can't tell.
Back to the language and communication thing. I mean, if we're gonna judge them by our other animals by our language, we win. But if we judge them by their language, perhaps they win.
Right.
Well-
I was listening to a podcast with scientists the other day, who was saying that, but one thing about human language is that we can give a language to the future, which animals don't seem to be able to do. We can envision,
Or conditional.
right, yeah, we can envision the future and then communicate that too, which animals, you know, are much more.
Were
in the
you to
pres-
have gone to the store, you would have bought more milk.
Yeah,
Is something an animal can, no.
right, right,
Right? It can say milk,
right.
right? But it can't.
And
do
even,
that.
even like, when I was a kid, we were all amazed by Coco, the gorilla who can sign. And a lot of linguists think Coco was not really signing. It was always only the Coco's handler that knew what Coco was saying and could say like banana. But that's very presentist. It's not language like a human has that can
But,
talk about the future.
but then if we go into things like trees communicating with each other
True.
or
True.
birds.
Or
I
fungi.
can watch my bird
Fungi.
feeder and I can tell you that they're communicating
Right,
with each
Yeah,
other.
yeah. And
Then-
bees communicate with each other about what's going on in the hive.
Right.
But no individual bee has
Fascinating.
it's the hive as a whole has some kind of mind that an individual bee doesn't have. So it's very different kind of communication than human communication.
Yes, I think it's unfair to
Yeah.
say that humans uniquely have communication. But what I think is fair, that we have a level of sophistication. Certainly, I know from my dog, when I walk my dog, even though it has to go to the bathroom and knows that then we're gonna bring the dog in, it doesn't plan ahead. There's no sense that it's thinking,
Do we consider ourselves more or less sophisticated than a roach if we can only live for 70, 80, 90 years?
Well,
and
that's
they
another-
Live for.
that's another question other than communication. Roaches are more long-lived.
Can an individual roach live
No, the
longer
individual
than
roach
90 years?
Well, I don't
This is
mean
it.
that individual roach does, but as a species.
As a species, it's been around for, yeah.
The meat inheriting the
Sharks
earth.
predate trees.
Yeah,
Okay,
sharks predate trees.
Yeah. Sharks
culture,
predate the rings on Saturn too.
Wow.
Really?
Well, they're ancient, they haven't evolved much. Yeah, that's what I do.
the next
That's what I do.
topic in terms of this list, cultures and technology. Yeah, I think it's hard to argue that we have symbols and beliefs, values, that we have complex tools. We can manipulate the tools. I mean, this computer is certainly a complex instrument. I don't know of any animal that's created a computer. Maybe they have, and they keep them hidden away in some place where we can't find them. Art and it's 8 o'clock. Art and creativity. Humans certainly have a highly developed creative sense. Our music, our art, that goes far beyond and makes us, I think, unique. Morality and ethics. I think humans are unique in having a sense. I don't know, maybe my dog has some ethical underpinnings, but it's very hard to see evidence of it.
Well, when when a lion eats a gazelle, they don't think about the ethics of, are they wiping out the gazelle population? But we humans, we could eat that gazelle too, but we think about bigger questions when it comes to it, right?
So we've, social complexity, we live in social units, certainly animals do as well. But I think in terms of sort of the hierarchies and the rules and the norms that go into our society are much more structured.
Or even we can have a society of, 350 million people here in America or whatever it is, or 1 billion people in India, or we could even think of the whole world as a society, right? Which
The
had,
chimps had 150.
right,
That's their
150.
maximum.
That and the fact that you have multiple different societies, right? You
Yeah.
have your work, you have your, whatever you are at home, you have whatever you are in the city, right? And then as a global citizen, we all have a role to play at that one time, whereas a chimp in a family of 15 is gonna be the chimp in the family of 15,
Right,
you know, they don't go, they're never a CEO in the afternoon.
Um,
You don't know about.
On that computer that we don't know where it is.
But we ironically.
So we've sort of touched on the concepts of symbolic thinking, mathematical formulas that humans do that I don't think animals do, concepts of altruism and empathy. My dog, I think, is empathetic. That really has a soft spot for my wife.
You see the mother going into a burning house to
Right.
go get her kittens. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's a matter of degree often, rather than unique features. And humans differ within these characteristics. Certain of us, I think, are
More
What?
empathetic.
than others, as well as we differing from other animals. So I think this has been a lot of fun, but I'd like to end perhaps on a high note. I'm getting, it's early, but all I have is what I have. Yeah, the last
But I
video.
can add something at the end, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to show?
So, yeah, so I have a video that I'd like you to take a look at. Sure. It's just 24 notes.
Emerged from a hot, dense sea of matter. Energy. As the cosmos expanded and cooled, it spawned galaxies, stars. Some 13. 0.75 billion years ago.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
It's always bothered me. Go ahead. When I've seen a person lose his ability to communicate through some horrible medical tragedy. I mean, there's ways to evaluate, a coma and so forth, but what I always hear is he's a vegetable or he's in a vegetative state. You've heard it, I can tell people are nodding, and to me, that is saying, I interpret it as.
Not here. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly, that is such a stigmatic, what do you think? I think it's a horrible stigmatic.
To me, that's, I kind of was trying to make that point earlier, like my own mind, because if you have a list of attributes that make up humans, and what happens for whatever reason, maybe you're a 3-month-old, or you are, in this case that you're in, that you mentioned, you don't have these attributes, are you still human? To me, that's a question, and many people feel yes, but we also feel no in certain circumstances too, I think. And I think, but the abortion debate's a little bit about that. So, to me, if you have a list and those attributes are not on the list, and then to me, it comes to some religious question again, or.
Yeah.
And certainly to call someone a vegetable, in my mind, is different than saying you're in a vegetative state. A vegetable, if somebody called me a vegetable, I'd be very hurt.
Your family would be too, if you were.
If I was in a vegetative state, it wouldn't be good, but it wouldn't be, at least they wouldn't be saying something.
Yeah,
to
so
do or
it's
doesn't-
using the
Okay.
term that's so similar, the vegetative state is.
But
more of a
even
scientific
for us
medical
as-
term, But it implies,
As humans, I think to recognize that shows that we have both some empathy. That we have feelings towards each other. Any luck on this?
Yeah, no, it's,
Oh,
no,
okay.
great.
Okay, 24 notes, guys. that that's it, that virtually everyone in our group would know that that music is tap. It's lyrics are that, you know, I think it's really a somber music. It's associated with funerals, particularly military funerals. And I think probably many would know the first verse of it anyway. It's something like, day is done, gone the sun, from the hills, from the lakes, from the lake, from the skies. All is well, safely rest, God is nigh. I see my wife almost in tears. So, final verse, not so well known, but is thanks and praise for our days. Neath the sun, neath the stars, neath the sky. As we go, this we know, God is nigh. And I think when I thought about it, I actually thought about introducing this topic with this song, because I think it really encapsulates much of what it is we're talking about, much of what the answer is to what is a human. These lyrics tell us that we have occupied the universe as reflected upon the mention of the hills, the lake, the sky, our sun, and the stars. At funerals, we recognize that death and the difference of what it is to be alive and what it is to be inanimate. These lyrics, I think, also say something about what makes human beings different from other living things. It's really a haunting melody that's a recognition that there was a past, but importantly, that there's also a present, and even more importantly, that there's a future. We have a profound recognition as human beings that all living things must die and will die. I think of all the animals, we're the only animals that have this recognition of death. What other characteristics are uniquely reflected in TAPS? Well, humans have complex and nuanced thinking. We have the sophisticated ability in terms of language to communicate these concepts and to pass these ideas to others. TAPS, the music is written on a musical score so that we can give it to our friends, our neighbors, and they can pass along to people into the future. And I'm sure TAPS will be around long after we're all gone. We have sophisticated tools like the trumpet that's used to make the music, the microphone that transmits this to across the internet, the computers, all sophisticated tools. And indeed, we also as humans, I think, have spiritual or religious thinking. Our faith-based approach to the realities of our universe, it comforts us in face of certain death. I think knowing that loved ones will be separated from us and we from them, but also knowing, as the final line said, God is nigh. So that's it.
Next.
Thank you.
Sorry to end on such an upper.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
it's reality.
Nice job, Matt.
Thank you, everybody online.
So Matt, now, thank you.
I was not nervous at all, quite frankly.
Yeah, good.
Great job.